Hello everyone and welcome to ACES Family Academies virtual edition for 2020. My name is Kurt Hansen. I am a 2014 graduate of the College of ACES, Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences. And today we're going to talk about plants and gardening. So like I said, I'm a graduate of the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences, and I'm an ecologist. So what that means is I work with plants, animals, water, soil, and kind of just how all those different groups interact and how they both affect each other, both the benefits and the competition that happens amongst those individuals. Right now I'm sitting in my backyard in my native plant garden, surrounded by some native mints, and today we're going to talk about how my education and some both plants, their habitats, and how they interact with each other can help you in your garden. There are some great benefits of gardening with native plants. Number one, native plants are very tolerant to a lot of the stressors that we run into in our local environment. So a great example of that is here in the summertime it is very hot, and in the wintertime it gets very cold. So a lot of our native plants are very both heat and cold tolerant, meaning that they can deal with a lot of frosts and they can deal with a lot of days of over 100 degrees. Additionally, native plants have very, very deep roots. Where this turf grass that I'm sitting in, the roots are only a couple inches deep. With these plants, as tall as they are high, they're actually double, triple, sometimes even quadruple, 4 times deeper. Their roots go that much deeper into the soil. So majority of the plant, like an iceberg, you're not seeing, you're just seeing the tip. But that's one nice benefit of natives. Another one is it's really great habitat for all of our native species. I'm going to let, once these plants go to flower in a couple of weeks, then they will start creating seeds, and those seeds serve as a great food source for a lot of birds, small mammals, insects, as they're either living in our environment all the time, or if they're birds as they migrate through in the beginning of the spring and at the end of the winter. It's also really great habitat for and food source for a lot of our pollinators, whether it's bees, flies, or ants otherwise. Some other great benefits is they come in a whole bunch of different shapes, sizes, colors, flower shapes, leaf shapes, stem shapes, you name it. Textures. This, like I said, right behind me are some mints. If you zoom in on these plants, and I don't know if I can get a really good video of it, but mints actually have a square stem. And all of the mints, just like the mint that you know, if you scratch them in between your fingers or rub them in between your fingers, you can get the smell of the mint, and they all have a little bit different smell. So this is one mint. This is mountain mint. You can see these thin, slender leaves, and then that square stem, and it's got some hair on it. Over here is another mint. This is bee balm. Monarda fistulosa also has a square stem. You can see it's not as hairy as the mint right next to it, and these leaves are a completely different shape. Still smells very minty, but here's a comparison of the two leaves. So even just within the same family, we have a lot of really great variety. And actually, where this one, the bee balm, is going to have some pink flowers, light pink flowers. This mountain mint is actually going to have white flowers. But both of them, if you run into them when you're in any natural areas, parks, prairies, even the side of a cornfield near where you live, on the side of the road, there's a lot of remnant prairies along the side of a lot of railroad right-of-ways and old cemeteries. If you end up walking through these mints, you'll definitely know it because you'll smell it before you see it, most of the times. But what we're going to do now is I'm actually working on a spot in my front yard that I had to, I've got some plants that I'm actually putting in there right now. So we're going to go talk about how different characteristics of plants and habitats change what can grow where and how you can put that design into practice, into making your yard look beautiful. So let's hop to it. So now we're in my front yard. I live in Forest Park. If you know where Forest Park is, it is just outside the limits of Chicago, just a city or two to the southwest. I'm from Lake Zurich, which if any of you know where that is, it's at the very northwest corner, not northwest corner of the state, but northwest corner of Chicagoland, very close to the border of Wisconsin. And the plants that we're going to be working with today are actually from a mixture of either Barrington, from a non-for-profit in Barrington that helps basically raise and propagate more of these plants, or another nursery that's in St. Charles that does a lot of native plant propagation, or that's growing more of that specific species or a bunch of species to make more of them. Here is the bed we're working with. So with this bed, you can see I've already ripped out the grass that was here already, and we've got some bare soil. But first thing you need to deal with whenever you're working on any project, whether it's at your home or if something I have to do for my job, is that you need to deal with that area and decide what you can and cannot grow there. So if you look in this space, there is no trees above. South is actually behind me this way, so that if you're looking at when the sun, because the sun is in the south and it moves from east to west throughout the day, so majority of the sunlight comes from the south. So I'm going to look at what sort of shade am I going to have blocking during the day. So earlier in the morning, I'm going to actually have both my house and the neighbor's house blocking some shade. And then in the middle of the day, I'm going to be pretty much set. But then in decently early afternoon, this tree in my neighbor's yard is going to start blocking the sun. And then I've got a little baby maple tree in my front yard that at the very end of the day, because it's little, it's actually, the light shoots right underneath my tree and hits this bed we're going to be working in. So we already know that in this situation, I'm going to need to get a plant that likes light, but that doesn't need complete light all the time. So you've probably heard of, if you've ever bought or grown plants, whether it's full light, partial shade, partial sun, or shade plants, that's one of the things you have to deal with is light. A really good way to figure out how much light you do or don't have is first looking at what I was looking at, what can cause shade, and see if there's anything that you could move or remove to either increase or decrease the amount of light that you have to grow the specific plant you're looking for. But the other thing we need to look into too is the amount of water that the soil is going to be receiving. So I've got a downspout coming down over here that currently shoots out onto the sidewalk. And when I was going to tell you about light for one more minute. Another way that you can figure out how much light you do or don't have is if you either set up a camera, maybe a trail cam, or if you just take photos every hour or every couple hours in your yard, you can see what parts of your yard get sun when, and you can start making a sun and shade map showing just drawing lines each hour to show where you do or don't get light, and then figure out in each section of your yard how much light each of those sections get. And you can kind of figure out what you can and cannot grow there. And that's where a lot of people, when they say I have a black thumb, I'm not good at growing things, it's because they're probably setting themselves up for failure in the first place. By having something that needs the amount of light that they don't already have. And like I just said, I'm going to talk about moisture. So my downspout, which is right here, the water comes off my roof, it comes down my downspout, it goes on my sidewalk, and because of that, I'm just basically getting whatever falls from the sky on my garden. But I'm definitely not at a super high spot up on like a hill or something, so I'm not dealing with super dry, and I'm not way down in a low spot, so it's not super duper wet. So I can go with something that's kind of in the middle there. The two plants we're going to be putting in today, this is called prairie smoke, and this one is called wild stonecrop. So wild stonecrop is not going to get very much taller than this, which if I can get a better angle, not much taller than this, just a couple of inches, and then it's going to shoot up a flower stalk, which it's already done, which is going to have these really cool flowers on it. They're white flowers. This is already going to seed pods, and then this Geum triflorum, or the prairie smoke, is also going to stay pretty short. These leaves are going to get a lot bigger. Late in the fall, they're going to turn dark red. Some of them are actually already doing it a little bit right now on the edges. But then early in the springtime, they shoot up a flower and a seed head that looks like just a puffball, like a puffball of smoke. So what I'm doing here is I've got these two sections kind of marked out. Everywhere where there's already mulch is where I'm going to be putting the prairie smoke, and everywhere where it's just the bare soil is where I'm going to be putting the stone crop. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple other things. One is mulch. So you can see we've got mulch down here, and I've got a whole bunch more mulch that I've got in these buckets. The reason you want to put down mulch is it actually helps with moisture. So putting that mulch down keeps it so that after it rains and the water soaks into your soil, that then that mulch is able to keep that moisture so it doesn't get heated up by the sun, and then that that water evaporate or leave that soil and go back up into the air again. So that's where you're going to want to put down mulch. What I was able to do because of what I do for my job, which is where I work with communities, municipalities, private companies and utilities to work on big development projects, I was able to track down one of the gentlemen and his company that I work with, that they had some leftover wood chips from one of their projects. And they gave it to the city, and I was able to go to a spot where the city was just giving away the leftover wood chips. So that's something where if you guys are looking to mulch your yard, this is not a dyed mulch. This is you've probably seen dyed mulch before. I actually have a little bit left from last year. So here's brown dyed mulch. So any of the mulch that you see that's brown or red or gold or all one color, they actually take the raw mulch and then they add a color additive to change the color of that mulch and get it all one color. So here you can see with the mulch that I've got, it's number one, a lot of different shapes and sizes with some twigs thrown in, but all my mulch is all different colors, and it's actually going to gray a little bit as it gets exposed to the elements. But that's something, like I said, you can go and find a place maybe in your town or your county, or maybe with your soil water conservation district in your county or region, that would assist you in being able to track down some of these materials. The other thing I've got here is I've got slow release fertilizer that's pelletized that I'm going to sprinkle on. I've got a little hand rake I'm going to use to move the mulch that's already out here. Got a pair of gloves so I'm not jabbing myself with the mulch, and then I just got a little hand trowel. And that's basically what I'm working with, because I already smoothed out this area. But I'm going to go start preparing one of these, and I'm going to show you guys how to plant some of these plants, and then we'll talk about mulching it and watering it, and hopefully you guys throughout this process will learn a little bit about plants and how to take care of them. And I guess the last thing I was going to mention earlier, that as what I'm trying to drive home with this, is just like how your dog or your family or your fish or your cat is, or your cows or goats are alive, your plants are alive. So just like how your dog might get scared of lightning, or maybe your sibling is scared of big dogs, or your pig freaks out when it's in the different pen than it usually is. That happens with plants when you move them around. They go through stress. So the way that we want to help these plants deal with stress is after we transplant them, or if they deal with a whole lot of sunshine more than they're used to, we're going to make sure that we give them more water, something for their roots to soak up, and to help that plant and the cells in those plants to help deal with those stresses. The only other piece that I want to mention really quick that might not relate to everyone, but if you ever are growing your own plants for your yard from seed, maybe it's tomatoes, green beans, squashes, whatever it might be, or maybe you're growing even a flowering plant, a sunflower, or some purple coneflower to put out in your yard, and you're growing it inside and then you bring it outside, or maybe you have a house plant that usually lives inside that you bring outside during the summertime, is that when you go from the amount of light that we get inside of our houses, which is usually filtered by either the glass, the shades, whatever it might be, there's less of the different UV rays or ultraviolet rays coming from the sun that get through our windows and into our house, whether they're blocked by the leaves, the curtains, or anything else. So what happens is when you take the plants from those conditions that they're used to and then bring them into a new condition, just like how when you go from inside to outside and all of a sudden your pupils have to change the size of your pupil to adjust to the new light, the plant is going to run into the same adjustment issues. But unlike where our pupils are adapting every couple seconds, with your plants they're going to need a little bit more help. So what we call that term, we call it hardening off. So the whole idea is that you're going to do is you're just going to do it gradually. So if you're growing these plants inside for a majority of the winter time or in the early spring, the first day you might just bring them out, put them in the shade for 2 hours, and then bring them back in again. And the next day you put them out for 4 hours, and then you bring them back in again. Or if you want to do it slower, you can do that. But that's where you're going to look for the signs that you've probably seen on your plants when the plant is thirsty or dealing with stress, is their leaves are going to wilt, or the flower stems are going to fall over, or whatever it might be. So you can pay attention to those things because those plants are giving you signals. So that's something to think about whenever you're working in your garden, hanging out around your house, or just when you're out and about. So let's get to it. So as you can see here, what I've done is I've taken the plants out and I've spread them throughout the garden to start to get an idea of how I think I'm going to arrange them all. In this case, you can end up setting them all out, move them around as many times as you want, and kind of get a good idea of where you think you want them to be. As I talked about before with stress, if you actually take the time and effort to put them in the ground, then dig them back out and put them back in again, every time you do that, you're going to stress the plant a little bit. But that's where, if it's a plant like this where it's still in a pot, you can bury that pot, look at it, and then decide you want to pull that back out again, and you're not actually putting too much stress on that plant. But that's where I actually have two different types of plants here. I've got some plants that are in pots, like so. This is what you're going to find at most of your local nurseries and gardens. And then I've got some plants that are actually just plugs. So they're usually a little bit younger plants, most of the time with pretty good, decent roots going though. But they're a lot smaller, and they're usually for big either planting projects or restoration projects, where you're going less for the size of the plants this year, but more so trying to get a whole lot done for a little bit lower price, and really get your population numbers up. But that's where with these, you can see that they're already out of that plastic casing that they came in. When you take all these other plants out of their plastic casing, what you're going to want to do is make sure when you get them out that you're treating them very carefully so the plant doesn't fall around. But then you go and you actually disturb those roots a little bit. You're basically giving those roots the go ahead to start reaching back out. They get what's called pot bound, which is when the roots take the exact same shape as the pot they're sitting in because they don't have anywhere else to go. But here we're going to go into planting this prairie smoke over here. Like I said, I've got some mulch down already, so I'm actually going to move that plant out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rake my mulch I put down before I went and dug everything out, and I'm going to pull that out. And in a best case scenario, you actually want to make your hole 2 times as deep and 2 times as wide as whatever you're planting. And that's where what we're talking about right now is I'm talking about if you're planting established plants. And I know today you're probably going to go to a whole bunch of classes, and this is not actually the methodology that we take when we're doing large-scale agriculture, because in that situation you're not trying to get something that's going to look really pretty in your front yard, or like this is a perennial, meaning that it's going to come back every single year, and it's a perennial native plant. If we're going to plant corn or soybeans or whatever it might be in a conventional agriculture field, we're going to just take seeds, and we're going to plant those seeds out in the field, and then have them all pop up and start taking care of them, dealing with weeds as we see fit and necessary. But then there are some plants that are a little bit more like what we're doing here with these plugs. We're like a lot of pumpkins. If you're ever to go to a pumpkin farm, they're going to start little seedlings in containers very similar to this one. Then they're going to use a machine that they're going to go out in the field, and they are going to actually drop all those little seedlings in a row out in the field. So every plant's a little different. It depends on what we have found to be the most efficient way of propagating and raising and growing that plant to the ultimate end that we're looking for. So here I've dug my hole. I'm going to add a little bit of my pelletized slow release fertilizer to the recommendations that were on the bag that I got it out of. And then I'm going to take my plant here, and usually I'm going to use 2 hands, but right now I'm holding the camera, and I'm going to put it in this plant with the most plants, with the exceptions of tomatoes and a few others. You want to plant the plant in the ground at the same level that the soil is currently at. So I want this soil to be at the same level as the soil that's around it. So I'm going to go ahead, put it in there. I'll see if it works with me or if I need to turn the camera off. And I'm going to put the soil back in around the plant. Kind of break up some of the clumps. You really want to do this when your soil is dry, because if you're cutting through your soil while it's wet, you can actually break down the structure or the internal shape of all your soil, which you want that extra space, because if you can see, these aren't perfectly circle and they're not perfectly square. So what happens is all these particles, when they're not all compacted together, and when I put them all back in, there's actually going to be space in between all of them, and that space is called pore space, and that either is filled with air, which helps the roots of your plant to breathe, because your plant, just like you and I, has to breathe. And that area can also hold moisture, so water can go in those areas to help get water to your roots. And then it's also a place for microorganisms. So that's where right now we're just looking at this plant that we can see right now, and obviously you can see my hand, but there are little animals, smaller, considerably smaller than any of the worms or ants or other bugs that we might come across that live in this soil. And a lot of them like living in that pore space. So we got to make sure that we're leaving space for them and not destroying our soil by going through it and digging it all up when it's wet and ruining that structure. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull the soil back in around it. And then I'm going to go ahead and compact a little bit around my plant. And the other thing too is by compacting a little bit, I'm also helping my situation with squirrels possibly coming back in to dig it back up again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this mulch and probably some more mulch that I've got over there in my bucket, and I'm going to put some mulch up around the edge of my plant. And then, like I mentioned before, what's the next thing I have to do? Water. Got to go grab my watering can or my hose and get it watered. So I'm going to do that with all of these plants and get this whole section of the garden planted. So thank you for joining me today on our little dive into plants, and especially with planting in your garden. As we talked about, there are already some great benefits when it comes to planting in your garden for all the animals and the insects, and even the quality of your soil and your water that's flowing through or exists in your yard. But the other great thing too is it makes your yard look pretty, or your neighborhood look pretty, and when you start doing that, then everybody else starts taking care of their yards too, and then your mayor pays a little bit more attention to your street, or your alderman pays a little bit more attention to your street, and then your senator and congressman may pays a little bit more attention to your town. And just by doing these little things in your yard, in your neighborhood, wherever you might be, you are actually just showing that, hey, we care about this place we live and the things we're doing, and because of that, you should too. So go out there, get your hands dirty, whether it's planting, hundreds and hundreds of acres, or just going out there and putting one plant in your backyard. It makes a big difference. So that is kind of just a summary of some of the knowledge that you learn about plants in general as an ecologist while at the University of Illinois. And then you go out and you kind of learn these individual quirks of individual plants as you run into them and experience them throughout your day-to-day life. And then you're able to use that information to figure out, one of my parts of my job is I have to identify where wetlands are. So wetlands are controlled by the Clean Water Act, which is run by the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA. And what we do is I have to go out and identify what areas are probably wet for a majority of the year, and I can do that just by looking at the plants and the soil and figuring out if it's a plant that really, really loves to be wet all the time, then I know I'm probably looking at a wet land. But if I'm looking at a plant that really doesn't like to have wet feet or have its roots in water all the time, I'm probably looking at upland or a dry area. So that's how you take this knowledge that's just as useful and fun in your yard and turn it into something applicable for a full-time job. So like I said, my name's Kurt Hansen, and I'm signing off. Enjoy the rest of ACES Family Academies, and go Illini.